Hello and welcome, it's our Confessions podcast. That's what this is, an audio array of terrible tales from the discerning Radio 2 listener. This week's concise collection includes a perplexed police pandemonium, already impressive, a worrying waterway woe, nicely done, a guileful grilling gimmick, not sure that guileful is a word, but we'll let it pass, and some manipulative muddy mischief. Very good. Who are you going to forgive? Here it all comes. This is Radio 2, it's a drive-time confession. We welcome the Venerable Deadly, who's here as well, as an occasional member of the Honourable Collective.
Absolute bless you, my child.
And Brother Matt and Sister Rebecca are here. Of course, dear Simon and the Cooperative of Honourable Adjudicators. This is from Jim. Thank you, Jim. This memoir has been locked away for safekeeping in fear that if it ever fell into the wrong hands, like the Taxpayers' Alliance, they might decide to try and recoup the cost and that I and a colleague unwittingly levied on the public purse through our innocent actions. But I feel that now is the time to repent of this sin. The incident took place approximately 8 years ago when I was wielding my trusty spanners to earn an honest crust. This particular time I was working for a family-run village garage, where most customers were still recognised and greeted by name on arrival. On this particular bright and sunny day, I had been allocated the task of diagnosing and rectifying a rattle, which was emanating from the rear of a well-known British-built, snazzy, executive-type car, which, as we all knew at the time, was incredibly well-built and handcrafted by skilled silversmiths wearing leather aprons and glasses perched on the tip of their noses. Or not. After a couple of road tests, I was able to find a stretch of country lane that had the perfect undulating surface to recreate the noise, which was of such an annoyance to the driver. As locating a noise from the rear of a car is somewhat difficult whilst in the driving position, I returned to the workshop to enlist the help of a colleague called Frank. Upon reaching the test track, with Frank riding shotgun, I suggested that as the noise appeared to be coming from outside the car, he should sit on the boot floor at the back and try to locate it there. So he sat in the boot. Well, we started off gently along the country lane, exchanging the occasional instructions. Slower, faster, brake, rougher ground, faster, rougher, etc. We approached one of the garage customers leaning on his 5-bar gate, this bearing more than a striking similarity to the usual yokel types portrayed in many a Two Ronnies sketch. I acknowledged the gentleman, assuming he recognised me from the garage, but was greeted with a blank stare. We continued around the bend for a short distance, but decided that more stripping and testing would be required to trace and rectify the rattle. Decisions made, Frank hopped out of the boot and into the passenger side. I turned the car round and we drove back along the lane past the same gentleman, who was now looking somewhat perplexed as he got smaller in my rearview mirror. After lunch I removed the bumper and checked the security of various fittings, decided that another trundle along the lane was required. Now, being a small rural village, not a huge amount happens, apart from the usual garden fence gossip, so imagine my surprise when rounding the first bend, in the distance, I could see a police car and 4 officers talking to the customer that I'd seen earlier. Well, curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to carry on along the lane. At this point, 2 of the policemen who were swapping notes on the road looked at me and did a very obvious double take. Getting closer to the disturbance, I realised that there were actually 3 police cars, 1 dog van, 7 law enforcers, and as I lowered my window, the unmistakable sound of a police helicopter overhead. What? On coming to a halt, one of the officers approached the car, me.
Was that you?
You should go on Britain's Got Talent.
No, please.
And here, doing his helicopter impression.
Well...
Oh, no, you're on the other side. I haven't finished.
I can do it if you're actually in the helicopter. We're looking down on this incident now. We can see these people. There are all sorts of things going on. There's a car. We can see a car. All that. Reporting now back to Simon Mayo.
Thanks. You're such an asset to the collective. The unmistakable sound of a helicopter overhead. On coming to a halt, one of the officers approached my car and asked me to remove the keys from the ignition and exit slowly, he emphasised. Before I could speak, the officer talked into his radio. It went something like this. We got him!
Something like that, really? OK.
He then asked if I'd driven down this road before. Yes, I said. Were you on your own, he said. No, I was with my colleague Frank, I said. Where was he? He was on the floor in the boot, I said. The whole time, said PC Plod. Well, no, he was in the passenger seat coming back. What colour shoes was he wearing? Said PC Plod. Now, I'm no Gokwan, says Jim, but I had a stab at black boots, thinking this would probably be OK. But no, he followed up with, well, what colour trousers was he wearing? Well, this was getting serious. Well, blue jeans, I think, I replied nervously. At this point, the haze started to lift and it all started to fall into place. Apparently, unbeknownst to me, on our earlier expedition, Frank had decided to lie down in the boot and partially close the lid, leaving his legs exposed from the knees down. So as we passed the man in his 5-bar gait, they bounced around as if attached to a lifeless torso. He thought there was a dead body in the car. When we came back the other way, in his mind, because the boot was now closed, those legs must have been part of a body that we'd dumped further down the lane. At this point, I had to chuckle, but the policeman wasn't exactly sharing my humour and was more concerned about the use of public servants and what was now beginning to look like a wild goose chase. They still wouldn't release me until 2 of their colleagues had gone to the garage and interviewed Frank just to check that he was still alive and had his legs. Looking back, I was lucky that he hadn't gone out for lunch. So Father Simon asked for forgiveness, please, not from the guy who called the police, as he should have realised he wasn't in an episode of Midsummer Murders, but for the strain levied on the public purse and from the owner of the car, who to this day has no idea that his car was a wanted vehicle or that his house had been under surveillance for several hours. Fortunately, he was out. Well, it's an interesting tale from Jim, because it really wasn't his fault. It was someone else had interpreted his actions in entirely the wrong kind of way and called the police. What do you make of it, Sister Rebecca?
I think it was Frank's fault for putting his legs out of the boot as they were driving along. He could have just closed the boot, couldn't he? I guess he couldn't have.
Well, then he wouldn't be able to see anything.
But he would have heard the rattle more, more effectively.
Yeah, he was there to listen.
And I also blame the guy who called the police, because he didn't think to question the fact there was one person driving with no passenger on the way past him the first time and 2 people coming back on the way back. I mean, that would have just been an obvious clue as to the guy in the boot was now the guy in the passenger seat. So I think, Jim, you are completely forgiven and blameless.
Well, the Venerable Deadly.
Well, I mean, Jim didn't call the police. Jim didn't know the legs were dangling out of the back of the vehicle anyway.
Suspiciously.
And it's probably the most excitement that stretch of road has seen for years.
I think
so forgiven, totally forgiven.
Imagine that, though. A police helicopter comes out. That's only for important incidents, one would imagine, Brother Matthew.
Well, indeed. Normally, with these kind of things, I'm very quick to point the finger. But I think this is one of those times where nobody is to blame. It's certainly not Jim's fault, and it's not your man in the back with his legs dangling out, because he's just doing his job, and who was he to know that people were going to be... Yes, a very good job. And I don't think it's the guy at the side of the road, because if I saw someone drive past with somebody's legs hanging out, I'd be, whoa, hang on. And I wouldn't just be put off by there then being 2 people in the car driving back.
How would you know?
How would I know?
How would you go? You go, whoa.
I go, whoa, hang on. Hang on, there you go. And also the police have got to act, haven't they? So actually, everyone comes out of this completely blameless.
Yeah, but do you forgive him or not?
Yes.
Oh, you do?
Well, I'm forgiving everyone, aren't I? I mean, that kind of mood.
It's confession time, and Venerable Deadly is back in the house, as you might have noticed.
Bless you.
Tonight's confession comes from Christian. Thank you very much indeed for this tale. Dear Father Simon and the Sympathetic Collective. Well, we'll have to wait and see. I recently heard a confession about a man having trouble with his trousers in Amsterdam.
Oh, yes.
Not another one.
And
yes, please.
That's prompted me to confess my own misdemeanours in that fine city, but it's okay. This is a family...
Definitely.
Yeah. This is a family-friendly confession from Amsterdam. There aren't many, but this is one of them. Nope. It's the summer of '95, and I was a student, says Christian. I was staying with a Dutch girl, Alva, and her family for a week, and it was completely wonderful, until the day we decided to do a canal boat tour. Alva had suggested it. The boat took in all the tourist hotspots and sounded like the perfect way to spend the day. Imagine our delight, however, when we discovered that the same company also hired out pedalos. The 2 of us, the sunshine, the calm, gentle canal, it sounded like a fantastic idea. Alva asked if we could start off on the boat and then pick up a pedalo at another stop. But the answer was a firm no. We could buy a ticket for the boat or buy a ticket for the pedalo. Can't mix and match. Being poor students, we couldn't afford both, so we settled on the boat. It was a big beast of a canal boat, and the map they gave us showed its perfect route around the city. We had a fine time hopping on and hopping off the vessel at different attractions, but we kept seeing those gleaming white pedalos in the sun. They were beckoning to us, Father Simon, they were, and so our plan was hatched. The ticket we'd been given just said day pass. There was no mention of whether we'd paid for the boat tour or paid for the pedalo. So, Alva, being Dutch, explained to the man at the kiosk that we'd like to get another pedalo, please. He looked a bit suspicious, but after taking our 50 guilder deposit, sent us off in our very own pedalo. "You have the map from your earlier journey, don't you?" he asked. Well, I did indeed. I had the canal map clutched in my hand, and I waved it at him. Oh, it was bliss. We pottered around Amsterdam's pretty little canals, warming our faces in the sun, taking silly photos, and waving at people on the bridges. We wanted to go to Anne Frank's house, so I kept my eye on the map, saying when to turn left and when to turn right. We were making steady progress. Steady progress that was until we reached what we can only describe as a very vast stretch of water. "How much further is it?" Alva asked. "Oh, we're nearly there," I replied confidently, but was also aware that the canal was getting much, much bigger than previous stretches of water, and that the canal boats were coming our way with increasing regularity.
Oh.
Does that help?
That's water, is it?
That's
Lovely.
not me making that noise, I'd like to point out.
Oh, you haven't come up with any particular sound effects yet?
No. Well, I was going to do the birds for you on a lovely day.
It's irrelevant. We're going off track again.
Oh, sorry.
Anyway, the canal boats were coming our way with increasing regularity. The tourists on the boats weren't nearly as smiley as the people on the bridges had been, and our gleaming pedalo started to feel rather small and plasticky in the shadow of the bigger boats. Was I mistaken, or was the pedalo getting a little bouncy, sort of choppy, almost like there were waves of some kind coming in? "Are you sure we're going the right way?" Alva asked me. I could hear an undertone of fear in her voice, but tried to keep mine calm. After all, we were following the route marked on the map. Yeah, I said, "We turn left here, and Anne Frank's house is, Oh. We turned a corner that didn't look right. The canal had opened onto a vast sea. There was a red and black sign high up on the wall, written in Dutch. Alva, what does that sign say?" She looked a bit pale as she read, "Danger, Amsterdam Shipping Canal, authorised vessels only." I don't think pedalos come under authorised vessels, and I could see that Alva was getting stressed. Unsurprisingly. "Look, it's fine," I said. "This is where we are on the map. If we just cut across the corner of the docks, we go under that bridge, we'll be there." Our legs had never pedalled so fast. With one eye on the bridge and the other on the container ships that were gliding into view, we made our way towards the bridge. "Christian," says Alva, "that's not a bridge. That looks like a tunnel." And so it was. It was actually a tunnel, which I thought would transport us out of the danger zone and back into tourist town, according to the map. So we had a choice: black tunnel ahead of us, or giant ships with big propellers behind us. We looked at each other and agreed. We were going in. As we plunged into darkness, I was relieved to see light up ahead. This meant we were close. Except I soon realised it wasn't daylight. It was an electric light, and it was moving towards us at speed.
Oh, no, yes!
Nice one, Deadly.
Masterly. And I was using my mouth for that.
Our legs stopped pedalling for one horrible second, and then a boat horn bled. Oh, sorry.
Yes. Pardon me.
Backwards, I shouted. "I am!" shouted Alva. We pedalled so hard we'd have made the British Olympic cycling team proud. Wow. Good thing, too, because seconds later we were bobbing safely to one side as a huge canal boat emerged from the tunnel, blasting its horn. Now we had no choice but to retrace our steps back across the corner of the docks, back down the big canals, until, with sighs of relief, we finally found a mooring point for the Canal Tour Company. But by this time it was past 6, and to our dismay everything was locked up. There was no one to give our pedalo to, and no one to give our 50 guilders back. We explained our predicament to a passing local who looked as though he'd had sampled the pleasures of Amsterdam, and after looking at our map said, "No, this is the map for the canal boat. You should have had a different one for the pedalo." And it was then we realised the error of our ways, and feeling sheepish, we left the pedalo moored up and did what all students do in times of trouble. We rang our parents. Alva's parents particularly. So we seek forgiveness from Alva for not realising the map that we were following was strictly for canal boats only, and from the Canal Tour Company for our deception. I seek forgiveness from Alva's father, who drove into the centre of Amsterdam to pick us up after our ordeal, and whose 50 guilders were spent on our deposit, which he never got back. I can safely say that I have learnt my pedalo lesson, and I will never, ever do it again. Well, it's a fine story, and it's a nice Dutch-themed story, heavy pedal being the theme, and this is what Sister Rebecca makes of it.
Personally, I can't stand pedalos. I find them absolutely exhausting after about 5 minutes. So I don't know why anyone would want to get into a pedalo when they could have had a canal boat.
It's fun. They're fun.
It's quite fun. It is quite fun for about 5 minutes, and then it just gets knackering and scary.
But you'd normally get somebody else into pedal for you, or...?
Well, yeah, you could do.
Yeah,
I suppose
that'd be the
so. It's
way.
not that fair.
That's what the kids are for, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're quite, they're not that strong, really.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
When they're kind of
They will
4
be
or
one
5
day. They
you
will
and
be
they're-
one day.
Yeah, I've got to wait for that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think, in a way, I suppose it serves them right for taking the pedalo when they weren't really supposed to. They had the wrong map and everything. But I think that they suffered enough with all that. It did sound very frightening, so I'm going to forgive.
Genuinely scary. There is that moment where you think you've pedalled out too far and you realise that you have to get back. Yes, Venerable Deadly.
Yes, indeed. I think they got their just desserts. You're absolutely right there, Rebecca. They lost their 50 guilders. The boat is back, all in one piece. So the boat company should be reasonably happy, and they couldn't be bothered to wait anyway. They just went home. And Alva's father, well, that's what fathers are for, isn't it, Matt?
It
They
is.
come and pick
Yeah.
you up in
Yeah.
times of crisis. So, on balance, and only just, I will forgive.
Thank you very much indeed, Brother Matthew.
Well, we certainly got our money's worth out of the Foghorn Effect CD that we've clearly shelled out for. Well done. Worth every penny.
Rarely used it.
Yes. Yeah, well done, everyone.
See why.
I'm with Rebecca on pedalos. Can't see the point. I've put children in the front. It's a waste of time because they're pedalling away furiously, and because I'm a little bit weightier than they are, weightier than them, then the wheel spends the entire time just splashing out of the water. It's pointless. So then I end up having to do it.
It's not a wheel, by the way.
wheel-
It's a propeller.
Oh, yeah, whatever. Yes, it's not very maritime. But basically, yes, a waste of time. So, and also this map. So there's a different map for a pedalo, for a canal. It's all water. What are these Dutch people doing? All these Dutch people are deliberately, that's what they're doing, deliberately confusing tourists with the confusing canal boat stroke pedalo maps.
You can take bigger
It's
boats,
a scam,
bigger
clearly.
boats in bigger water.
No, because they'd all fit in. So I'm going to say forgiven.
Here's another Drive Time confession. This one from Sandra. Thank you very much indeed, Sandra, for your tale. Send yours in to confessions@bbc.co.uk. If you miss any, there's the Confessions podcast, which you can download at the end of each week with all the terrible tales all there. Dear Father Simon, the ever-caring collective, writes Sandra. I'm writing to ask forgiveness for what I believe is a relatively minor misdemeanour in the kitchen department. I think we'll be the judge of that. The story takes us back to 2002, when I was at Cardiff University in my 4th year, living with 4 other girls. Well, I say 4 other girls, but one of the girls, Lucy, had invited her boyfriend to live with us too, without ever asking the rest of us if it was okay. And it wasn't. He was not a student, but training to be a personal trainer. And needless to say, after a while it hacked the other 4 of us off mightily that he was living with us rent-free in his lycra shorts and vest. You would, wouldn't you? Because
I've already made up my mind.
that's not what you want. He would spend most of his days lounging around the house, watching television and exercising manfully
Hang on.
In
How's he
the-
doing both of those?
in the living room. He can't have had many clients because he barely ever worked, as I recall. Well, one particular annoying habit of the boyfriend, he was called Mitch, by the way, was that he never cleaned out the grill that he would use on a daily basis. You know, the one named after the famous sports guy. It didn't annoy us because we wanted to use said grill, but because every time he switched it on, the house would be filled with the smell of burning fat from the previous cooked meals. It stank, and he never washed it. The smell would permeate up our stairs to where the 4 rooms were and seep into our clothes and our bedding and our very skin. Lucy and Mitch had the biggest room, which was downstairs, and seemed completely oblivious to the foul smell that was eroding the walls of our house. Whatever a whale factory ship smelt like, awash with oil and carcass, it was worse than that. I hope we're painting a suitable fatty
It was
picture.
really bad.
It was rank. One evening, when just myself and one of the other girls, Hannah, were in the house, we decided that enough was enough. We had to put a stop to the grilling for the sake of our lungs and our skin. Now, whenever we needed to know how to fix something, plumbing or electrical, we would always call my dad. He's the biggest fount of knowledge for anything DIY and a trained electrician, you should know. We thought if he knew how to fix things, he must also know how to unfix them. So, shutting ourselves in the kitchen, we gave him a quick call. I'm not sure whether we told him the real reason why we wanted to render the machine useless, but Dad, ever keen to impart some of his knowledge onto his very unpractical daughter, duly obliged. He told us a clever and safe way to...
Well done. Yeah, obviously it's safe.
to stop the plug from working, and with just a few adjustments we'd managed to stop the grill from turning on at all. We were very pleased with ourselves, and after thanking my dad, stood back to admire our handiwork. The grill looked exactly the same as it always did, only an electrician would be able to spot the tiny amendment that we'd made at the back of the machine. We didn't have to wait long to see the fruits of our electrical skills. The next evening, Mitch and Lucy went to the kitchen and switched on the grill, ready to cook their fatty meat. Hannah and I heard them banging around in the kitchen below our rooms and waited patiently for them to realise what was happening. We sat huddled in silence, listening and stifling giggles in our room, waiting for the inevitable argument. 10 minutes later, an angry-sounding Mitch told Lucy that the grill wasn't working. It had been turned on for ages, and there was no heat whatsoever coming from it. They spent the next half hour trying to work out what was wrong before giving up and going out for a takeaway. We were jubilant. We had successfully sabotaged the machine and saved our clothes and skin from smelling like melting pig fat. Over the next couple of weeks, there were a few moments of panic for Hannah and I. One day, Mitch came in with a new fuse, believing that to be the culprit, that he would fix it very easily. We sat in the lounge praying that he wouldn't notice the little tweak we'd made. Thankfully, as we suspected, he was not electrically minded, and so our act of sabotage went undetected. For the rest of our year at university, actually, and the house no longer smelt. There were, however, unintended consequences. The clean-smelling house turned Lucy into a born-again vegetarian, and soon after that she dumped Mitch and found a clean-living, tofu-loving social studies man called Nick. So, what we need forgiveness for? Well, really not from Mitch, our uninvited housemate, who quite frankly ruined the tranquility of our home and spoke annoyingly loud as well as stinking the place out and wearing lycra and not doing any work. I'm sure he found a carnivore willing to tolerate his love of animal fat, but I do seek forgiveness on behalf of myself and Hannah from Lucy for breaking her grill when it was in perfect working order and just requiring a good old clean, which they couldn't be bothered to do, all hanging around watching television all day. Anyway, Sister Rebecca.
There's nothing like students living together in one house, isn't it? And how they wind each other up with their annoying habits. But I think Mitch did sound really annoying with his lycra and his exercising. But why couldn't they just have had
Look at me bending over while I'm watching Countdown.
Exactly. Doing my sit-ups.
That was Mitch, by the way. Not
Why couldn't they just have had a word with Mitch and asked him to wash the grill? It would have been easier, wouldn't it? Do you think he wouldn't have done anything? I think... yeah, it's a difficult one. They should have just asked him to do it, but on the other hand, he was really annoying and he wasn't paying the rent. So I think it was justified what you did. But it's a bit odd that a clean-smelling house can send someone into vegetarianism, turn somebody into a vegetarian.
I think they just...
How bizarre.
It was just obviously they realised what the rest of the world smells like.
If it's not... Therefore, I don't want to be with Mitch and he eats meat.
Smelling like a whale factory ship.
I forgive you, Sandra, because I think there's nothing worse than the smell of cooked fat.
Thank you. And what do you think, Brother Matthew?
Do you know, it's far too easy, in my opinion, to confront people about things that you don't like. Far better, I think, to sabotage their equipment so that they can't use it anymore. All your fault, Mitch, and your lycra and your daytime tally, and you're not paying rent. What are you doing living in the house if you're not paying rent? I don't care who you're going out with. Pay the rent. Oh, I can't pay the rent because I haven't got any money because I spent all my lycra shorts. Out the door then, sunshine. Enough of that.
And I'm a personal trainer, but nobody wants me.
Personal trainer, but apparently not training anyone but myself. And for that, I am going to forgive, because I'd have done far worse.
People's verdict, please, on 88291. Do you forgive Sandra or not? Simon Mayo at bbc.co.uk. We'll take flats and student-based confessions.
Yes, we will.
Grilling and horrible oily smell type confessions.
Lovely.
If there are any of those. Confessions at bbc.co.uk. Thanks. Whale factory ship confessions. I don't know. By the way, on the subject of barbecuing for one, we had Nigel's in. Brother Nigel's joining us in our collective today.
Hello on this glorious day.
And this is Peter G in Cardiff. I barbecue for myself all the time. Potatoes, corn on the cob, and meat sorted. I even cook Christmas turkey on the barbecue every year. I just think it's particularly adventurous to set up all that barbecue, do all the faff for one person.
Some people have those gas barbecues, don't they? That are easy.
What, they don't count?
Do they not count? Oh, that's controversial, Simon.
Do you think?
Yes.
Anyway, the confession music is up and running. Food coming up after 6 o'clock. But this is a confession. A shocking one here from Sam. Thank you very much indeed. Brother Matt's on sabbatical today. He has extra prayers, is what he has to do for all his many crimes.
He'll be feeling his worry beads.
Usually drink-related, I think. Anyway, so we have Sister Rebecca, Sister Caroline and Brother Nigel. Dear Father Simon of the Caring and Conscious Collective, says Sam, I write to seek forgiveness for a terrible trick I played on my sister as a child, the consequences of which were so bad that I actually completely escaped punishment in the resulting aftermath. This is wrong, so now is my moment. It was the mid-80s and an exciting time in our household as my father had just bought his first piece of land for his landscaping business. 12 acres of pasture with some beautiful woodland, and he was extremely proud of it. On the day in question, my friend Alfie was over to stay at our house during the school holidays. My father, probably thinking he was doing my mum a favour by getting us out of the house, asked if we wanted to join him for a look around his new purchase. I eagerly accepted, as there was something I wanted to show Alfie, which I'd found on a previous visit. Really. Much to my dismay, my sister, Eleanor, demanded to come too. Well, my mother said it was okay, but warned my father that under no circumstances was she to get dirty. Not at all, because she was all dolled up, ready to go to a birthday party at lunchtime. She was dressed like a princess, in a taffeta gown with lace and trim. This can only end very badly. We drove down in the car, and on arriving, Alfie and I immediately ran away, making sure that we'd shaken Eleanor off, as boys want to do. I was very eager to show my discovery. It was an old slurry pit that lay in the middle of the land. This is what I'd discovered. This is what I wanted to show my friend. For those that don't know, a slurry pit is much like a very large garden pond, but rather than being filled with glistening water, this was full to the brim of cow excrement. That, over the years, had formed a thick crust with tufts of grass growing out of it. Being young boys, we excitedly started to throw sticks and stones and anything that we could into the muck, which would break through the crust and cause a satisfying gloopy noise as the air bubbles were released. Like that. I don't know, does that sound like cow excrement? I'm not sure. Anyway, it's suitably gloopy, so it'll work. At this point, Eleanor appeared, walking across the field to join us, waving enthusiastically. I tried to ignore her, but she was calling out to us from the edge of the trees. My initial irritation was quickly replaced by a truly evil thought. I started waving for her to join us. Alfie picked up on the idea and started waving too, for between us and Eleanor was the slurry, somewhat disguised by the tufts of grass. She was probably surprised by my sudden friendly behaviour and broke into a girly run, not noticing the change in terrain under her feet. Alfie and I held our breath as she jogged across the slurry crust. But remarkably, it held her weight, and she seemed completely oblivious to it. Things then took a turn for the worse, however, which even the imaginings of an evil brother couldn't have contemplated. Her foot caught on one of the aforementioned sticks that I had thrown, and she tripped, performing a full belly flop through the crust where we'd been throwing the stones, and into the waist-deep, years-old cow slurry. There was not a square inch of her that wasn't covered with the foul-smelling gunk. The drive back home was terrible. Eleanor was wailing all the way. My dad, Alfie and I all had our heads out of the windows of the car, as the smell could have stripped wallpaper. It actually made your eyes sting. My father, after his initial dressing down from my mum, had to hose Eleanor down in the garden, party frock and all, while she continued to wail. The way you could. That would be very wise to do if you're all dolled up and ready to party. So Father Simon says, Sam, I need to seek forgiveness, not for tricking Elena into the slurry. Believe me, the drive home was punishment enough. But I do ask for forgiveness from my sister for the years of having to relive this event, to listen and smile politely as the tale is retold again and again at just about every gathering of family and friends for the past 30 years. I have never taken the blame that I deserve. Until now. Brother and sister, and a big bit of slurry in the middle, and that's the way it turned out. She was going to the party. She was dressed like a princess. She looked fantastic. By the time her brother had finished, she looked as though, well, exactly as she'd fallen in the slurry pit.
Yeah, but who sends a girl dressed in a taffeta gown out to a slurry pit?
Parents.
That's parents. Which parents?
Well,
I mean,
it does say, my mother warned my father.
But I think that was a little bit naive of her to think that she's going out with her brother and her brother's friend and not going to get dirty. I mean, she could have just got a bit of mud on her. She would have had to get changed. So I think she should either have got into a tracksuit and gone out with them, or not been allowed out with them. But is it true that Sam didn't warn her? Is that the thing? He basically could have warned her. He encouraged
her over.
Yeah, that is pretty awful. But I do blame the mother. So, Sam, I'm going to forgive you.
It's 2 feet deep. I mean, this is pretty horrendous stuff. So Sister Caroline is going next, actually, I think.
It is a dangerous business as well, running across fields with slurry, as I've experienced to my own horror.
Have you?
Well, I'm normally pushed over on a bike by
His
one of my
brothers,
brothers.
right? There you
Yeah, too right. I absolutely forgive him. He was just waving in a friendly manner. Nothing to do there, and she shouldn't have been running in such a pretty frock anyway. She should know to walk or glide like proper girls do.
Brother Nigel, is interesting. Yes, I mean, it is interesting that, you go out all dolled up for a party while walking across woods and fields, but how do you feel about this?
I'm actually not going to agree with the sisterhood.
No.
And I'll tell you for what, I grew up on a farm, and one of the most dangerous things on a farm was a slurry pit. Really, really, and the fact that it was only waist deep was incredibly lucky, because there has been some appalling stories, and that, the classic one is when you walk across and the crust goes and boom, and that's it. And when growing up, it was the minute I heard slurry pit, it was just something I thought, because if we were ever warned not to go anywhere near, it was a slurry pit.
Were you wearing a taffeta dress?
On more than one occasion, so that was a double reason not to go it. But also, I was surprised that it hadn't been drained or filled in when they took it over, because again, that's the type of thing that normally, you buy some land and there's a slurry pit on it. So there you go. Sam, and Alfie egging each other on this occasion. Eleanor was very lucky to get away with it.
They were this week's confessions. Pretty good, I thought. Let us know yours, because we all know you've got one tucked away. confessions@bbc.co.uk. More for you next week. Don't forget to download our weekly Mayo, available now with a big long Eagles interview. Yes, it's available every Thursday. Thank you. Leave some money at reception.
Simon